The registration desk at Varith 9 Academy smelled like recycled air and machine oil. 40 cadets stood in a long line, each one filling out their intake form on a small glowing panel. Most of them were taller than the human at the back of the line. Most of them had thicker skin, harder bones, or natural plating along their arms and necks. They came from worlds that had been part of the interstellar coalition for centuries. Their species had been flying between stars before humans had figured out how to leave their own atmosphere. Dane Rourke stood at the back of the line and filled out his form the same as everyone else. He was not tall. He was not impressive to look at. He had brown hair cut short, a plain face, and the kind of stillness that comes not from confidence but from having spent a long time around things that could kill him. He was 26 years old. He had spent 3 of those years on the Outer Rim, in a place the Coalition called a border dispute and soldiers called something much worse. Nobody spoke to him while he waited. A few cadets glanced at him the way people glance at something they have already made up their minds about. The first real moment came during the physiological evaluation. It was standard procedure. Every cadet stripped down to a baseline layer so the Academy's medical AI could run a full body scan, bone density, organ mapping, muscle fiber assessment. The data went into their training profile and stayed there for the entire program. It was quick, clinical, and usually boring. Dane removed his jacket. The room did not go loud. It went quiet, which was worse. His arms, his torso, the left side of his neck, all of it was marked. Old burned tissue ran from his right shoulder down to the elbow, puckered and pale against the rest of his skin. A long blade scar crossed diagonally over his ribs. Shrapnel had left a scattered pattern of small, dark marks across his left side, like a map drawn by something violent. His back, visible when he turned for the scan, told the same story in different shapes. The medical AI beeped. The cadets did not move on. SRYN was the one who spoke first. He was Velhari, tall, blue-skinned, with a narrow face and pale eyes that missed nothing. Velhari healed fast. Their skin sealed over small cuts within minutes, and their bone structure was dense enough to absorb impacts that would shatter a human femur. SRYN had never, in his entire life, seen that much accumulated damage on a living person. His people would have he said, loud enough for the room to hear, that a species that collects wounds like that should probably reconsider attending a military academy. A few cadets laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Lyra did not laugh. She was Quillari, slender, with wide amber eyes and a careful way of watching things. She stood 2 spots away from SRYN and looked at Dane and said nothing. She was trying to understand what she was seeing. On Quillari worlds, heavy scarring was associated with poor reflexes or bad judgment. You got hurt because you were not fast enough to avoid it. She was not sure SRYN was wrong, but something about the way the human stood there, not embarrassed, not angry, not performing anything at all, made her hold off on deciding. Das was Orican. He was built like a cargo container and had the personality of one, mostly. He looked at Dane's scars and said nothing, which was his way of processing something he did not yet have a category for. Commander Orvith watched from the far end of the room. He was old and reptilian, with gray-green scales and small black eyes that had seen 40 years of coalition military service. He had trained cadets from 19 species. He had seen arrogance before, in every shape it came in. He let SRYN's comment sit in the air without responding to it. He looked at Dane. Dane had not reacted. He stood where the AI directed him, arms out at the angle it requested, looking at a point in the middle distance that held nothing in particular. When the scan finished, he put his jacket back on. He picked up his kit bag. He walked to the next station. Orvith made a small note in the intake file he was reviewing. Not about the scars. About the stillness. Later, after assignments were posted and cadets had found their bunks, Lyra passed Dane in the corridor outside the barracks. She almost said something. She stopped herself. She did not know what to ask yet. The question was still forming in the part of her mind that worked slowly and carefully, the part that did not accept easy answers. She filed it away and kept walking. SRYN, 2 corridors over, was already explaining to his bunkmate that humans were a strange inclusion in a serious military program. He said it with the ease of someone who had never been wrong about anything important. Dane sat on the edge of his bunk in the dark. He set his boots by the door. He lay down. The station hummed around him, the way all stations do. That low constant vibration that never fully lets you forget you are surrounded by the vacuum of space on all sides. He closed his eyes. He had slept in worse places. 3 days into the program, SRYN figured out that mocking Dane in the evaluation room had been the easy part. The human did not react to it then, and he did not react to anything after. That, more than the scars, started to bother SRYN in a way he could not name. The first week was classroom-heavy: biomechanics, coalition tactical history, threat assessment frameworks. Dane sat in the middle rows and took notes by hand, which some alien cadets found strange. Lyra used a memory crystal. Das used a neural tap. Most of them had some form of assisted recall. Dane used a small paper notebook and a pen he kept in his front pocket. During the biomechanics lecture, the instructor, a thin Velhari academic named Saroth, pulled up a comparative species chart to illustrate injury response times across coalition members. He did not intend to single anyone out. He simply used available data. The chart showed humans near the bottom in natural healing speed, impact resistance, and pain threshold tolerance before incapacitation. SRYN leaned over to the cadet beside him and said something quietly. The cadet glanced at Dane and looked away again. A small exchange. Easy to miss. Dane was still taking notes. After the lecture, SRYN stopped in the hallway outside and waited for Dane to come through the door. When he did, SRYN asked him directly, in front of 6 other cadets, why a human would pursue a combat career given what the chart had just shown everyone. He did not say it with heat. He said it the way someone asks a question they already know the answer to, like he was offering Dane the chance to admit something obvious. Dane stopped walking. He looked at SRYN for a moment. Then he said, "Because we keep going anyway." SRYN waited for more. There was no more. Dane walked past him toward the training wing. A couple of cadets smiled. One said that was either the bravest thing they had ever heard or the most pointless. SRYN decided it was the latter and moved on. She caught up with Dane that evening near the equipment storage bay and asked something she had been working up to since the evaluation room. She asked how many of his scars came from actual combat and how many from training or accidents. Dane thought about it. Then he said, all of them were combat. She asked how many separate engagements. He told her a number. She did the math quickly: his age, the years of service he would have had, how many engagements that number implied. The math did not fit the way she expected. It was too high. She asked if he was serious. He said yes. She did not say anything else right away. She was processing again, that slow, careful thing her mind did when the category did not match the data. Das had been around the corner checking out a piece of gear and heard most of it. He did not announce himself. He simply walked past them on his way to dinner. But his eyes went to Dane once, brief, flat, the way an Orican looks at something before deciding whether it deserves a second look. The endurance drills came at the end of the first week. The academy ran them to build a baseline. Dane finished 4th in the cohort. Not first, not by some dramatic margin, just 4th out of 40 cadets, in a test designed for species with better natural physical profiles than humans. He did not sprint at the end. He did not make noise about it. He crossed the line, drank water, and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. SRYN finished 7th. He did not say anything about the results. He looked at the board once, and then looked away. Lyra finished 12th, and immediately looked for Dane's name on the list. She found it, and stared at it longer than the number required. That night she pulled up the Coalition medical database on her personal screen and read everything available on human physiology. She read about pain response, about how the human nervous system processes injury signals versus performance signals, about the documented cases of humans continuing to function at high output under damage levels that would have shut down most other species. She read for 2 hours. Then she closed the screen and sat in the dark of her bunk. She thought about the way SRYN had asked his question in the hallway. She thought about what she would have said if someone asked her the same thing about Quillari. She thought about the answer Dane gave. 5 words, no drama behind them, no performance. Because we keep going anyway. She had spent 2 hours reading biology. She was starting to think that was not actually the point. Nobody told the conduit to fail. It just did. That is how most bad things happen in training. Not because someone planned it wrong, but because equipment is old and pressure builds and metal gets tired. The combat simulation wing on Vareth 9 had been running exercises for 11 years. The pressurized conduit along the left wall of Corridor 7 had been flagged for maintenance twice. It had not been replaced yet. The exercise was a breach scenario. Four-person fire teams had to move through a locked corridor system, clear each room, and reach an objective at the far end. Live kinetic rounds, reduced yield, fired by automated defense nodes. Painful if they hit. Not lethal. Not usually. Dane's fire team was SRYN, Lyra, and DOS. None of them had requested each other. The assignment came from the roster, and that was that. They moved well, actually. Better than Dane expected for a group that had not trained together yet. SRYN was fast and gave clear signals. DOS moved through doorways like a wall, deciding to relocate. Lyra stayed tight and communicated. They had cleared 4 rooms and were pushing into the 5th when the conduit went. The sound was a sharp crack followed by a deep hiss. The pressure release sheared the joint plate off the wall and sent it spinning across the corridor at roughly 1 meter height. SRYN ducked. DOS took it on the forearm and his plating turned it. Lyra was behind a doorframe. Dane was in the open. The plate caught him across the right forearm and dragged into his shoulder. Not a clean hit, a tearing drag. He turned with it, which was the right instinct, but the edge opened him along the forearm and bit deep into the meat above his shoulder. He felt the heat of it before he felt the pain. That was also normal. The exercise stopped. SRYN looked at Dane. The forearm was bleeding openly. The shoulder was worse. The fabric of his training suit had torn, and below it the wound was deep and dark and not small. SRYN had seen injuries in simulations before, minor cuts, burns, impact bruising. He had never seen anything like this on a living person who was still standing. He waited for Dane to go down. Dane did not go down. He looked at the wound on his forearm. He reached into the medical kit on his belt, pulled out a compression seal, a flat, flexible patch with a pressure adhesive, and placed it over the forearm. He pressed it down with his other hand. Then he looked at the shoulder, reached back and sealed that too, one-handed, without looking directly at it, the way someone seals an envelope. He looked at his fire team. "Resume the exercise," he said. No one moved. The buzzer was still going. Lyra had stepped out from the doorframe. DOS was watching Dane with an expression that had no clear name in Orokin but roughly translated as recalibration. SRYN had not closed his mouth yet. Dane said it again, quieter. SRYN moved first. Then the others. They finished the exercise. Dane took point for the last 2 rooms. He cleared both. His right arm moved slower than his left, and once he braced against a doorframe and breathed for a moment. But he did not stop, and he did not ask for help, and he did not mention the shoulder again until they reached the objective room and the final buzzer sounded. The medic was waiting outside. She was a small Quillari, efficient and professional, and she took one look at Dane and said several things in rapid Quillari that Lyra later declined to translate directly, but described as very concerned. The medic examined the forearm, then the shoulder. She called for a second opinion from the station's medical AI, which confirmed what she already suspected. The shoulder wound had gone to bone in one section. The compression seal had slowed the bleeding, but the damage underneath was significant. Dane thanked her. He sat on the bench by the exit and let her work. SRYN stood against the opposite wall and watched. He was trying to organize what had just happened into something that fit his understanding of how things worked. In Velhari culture, visible injury meant reduced capacity. Reduced capacity meant you stepped back, let someone else lead, recovered. You did not seal it with one hand and clear 2 more rooms. He watched Dane talk to the medic. Dane was asking how long the treatment would take and whether he would be cleared for drills the next morning. Not asking if he was going to be all right. Not asking what the damage was. Asking when he could get back. DOS sat down on the bench beside SRYN. He did not say anything. He put his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor in the way Orokin do when they are deciding something important. Lyra stood near the door and looked at her hands. She thought about the database she had read the night before, all that careful clinical language about human pain thresholds and injury response. She thought about how none of it had prepared her for watching it happen. Reading about a thing she was learning was a very different experience from standing 3 meters away from it. SRYN stopped making comments. It happened gradually, the way a tide goes out, not all at once, but one small pull at a time until you look down and realize the water is gone. He still spoke in the barracks. He still debated tactics in class and scored well on assessments. He simply stopped saying anything about Dane. The jokes dried up. The sideways looks to other cadets stopped. He did not announce any of this. He just went quiet on the subject. Dane noticed. He said nothing about it. It was Lyra who came to him first with actual words. She found him in the common area 2 evenings after the corridor exercise, sitting at a table with a cup of something warm and his paper notebook open. She sat across from him without asking. He looked up, then back down at his notes. She took that as permission. She told him she had read the Coalition medical database on humans. She told him the numbers, the pain thresholds, the injury response data, the documented cases. She told him the data was interesting, but that it had not helped her understand what she saw in the corridor. Dane closed the notebook. She asked how he did it. Not the wound specifically. All of it. Dane thought for a moment. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said the body heals. Not perfectly. Not without leaving marks. But it heals, and the mind adjusts to what healing feels like. And after a while the gap between getting hurt and getting back to work gets shorter. Not because the pain is less. Because the decision to push through it becomes a practice skill, same as any other. Dane said that on his world, in the units he had served with, scars were something different. They were a record. Proof of what you went into and came back from. Not something to hide. Lyra sat with that for a while. Then Doss pulled out the chair next to her and sat down without being invited. He set his large forearms on the table and looked at Dane with that flat, recalibrating expression he had been wearing since the corridor. He said that in Orokin warrior tradition there was a concept that did not translate well into Coalition standard. The closest version was something like a soldier who bleeds and does not stop being a soldier. He said it was considered one of the highest things an Orokin warrior could be called. He said the word in his own language. It was short and hard-edged and sounded like something struck against rock. Then he said Dane was that. He did not elaborate. He stood up, pushed the chair in, and walked to the food station. Lyra watched him go. She looked back at Dane. Dane had picked up his pen again and was writing in the notebook, and she could not tell if the conversation had affected him at all or if he had simply filed it somewhere internal and continued. She suspected the latter. She was starting to think that was a very human habit. She went back to her bunk and did not open the database again. She had been trying to understand Dane through his biology. She was seeing now that was the wrong angle. One observer, a Velhari strategist, which she found grimly ironic, had written a single line at the end of a long assessment. She read it 3 times. It said, "They are aware of the cost, and they go anyway, and I do not yet have a framework that explains this adequately." Lyra closed the file. She lay on her bunk and looked at the ceiling, the dull gray paneling with its rows of ventilation slots, and she thought about SRYN going quiet, and Doss and his untranslatable word, and Dane in the corridor saying resume with blood on his arm like it was the most ordinary instruction in the world. She thought about the observer's line, the honest admission that the framework was not enough. She was beginning to think the same thing. She did not know yet what to replace it with, but for the first time since intake, she felt like she was asking the right question. The moon had no name. The Coalition called it Training Ground Null 7. The Cadets, after the first 6 hours on its surface, called it other things. It was cold in the way that gets into joints and slows thinking. Not the dramatic freeze of deep space, but the grinding cold of a place that had never once been warm. The sky was flat gray with no sun visible through the cloud layer. The ground was loose shale over hard rock. Every step made a sound like something breaking. The final assessment exercise ran for 3 days. Fire teams were inserted at separate points across a 20-kilometer zone and given coordinates for an objective. No overhead support. No fixed extraction until the end of the period. Short-range comms only. Dane's fire team was assigned together again. SRYN, Lyra, Doss. The first day went according to plan. They moved efficiently, found 2 of their 3 waypoints, and set up shelter before the temperature dropped at night. SRYN navigated. Doss carried the bulk of the shared equipment without being asked. Lyra mapped the terrain on her field tablet. They did not talk much. They did not need to. The storm came on the second day without warning. Weather data on Null 7 was unreliable. One moment the cloud layer was simply gray and low. The next, the wind picked up hard and visibility closed to about 30 meters. Comms degraded. They could reach each other, but nothing beyond their immediate team. Then they picked up a broken signal on the emergency band. It was a cadet from another fire team, a young Quillari female named Venerable. She had separated from her team during the first wind surge, gone down a slope she could not climb back up, and broken her leg on the landing. Her team was searching for her, but moving in the wrong direction. She had been alone for 2 hours in the cold with a broken limb and a failing locator. They found her in a shallow depression between 2 rock outcroppings. She was semi-conscious. Her leg was bent badly. Her core temperature was dangerously low. SRYN assessed quickly. He said they should shelter in place. The storm would break in 5 to 6 hours. Vin's condition would hold if they kept her warm. Moving through the storm with an injured non-ambulatory casualty over rough terrain was a serious additional risk. He was not wrong. Tactically, his read was sound. Dane looked at Vin's temperature reading again. He looked at the shelter options. Shallow, poor, not enough. He looked at the storm and estimated the break window based on what the weather was actually doing on the ground. Then he said they were moving. SRYN looked at him. He did not argue immediately, which was itself a change from 2 weeks ago. SRYN was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "What do you need?" Dane built a carry rig from their combined kit in 10 minutes. Frame from 2 tent poles, load distributed across a harness. His shoulder wound from the corridor exercise had not fully healed. He had been cleared for field duty, but it was still pulling. He took the primary carry position anyway. SRYN moved to the other side without being asked. Lyra and Doss flanked and managed the terrain ahead, finding the flattest lines, clearing loose shale, handling the wind breaks. Nobody suggested Dane step back. They had all understood something by now about what kind of suggestion that would be. They walked for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The wind did not let up. The cold did not let up. Ven drifted in and out, and once asked in a thin voice where they were going. Lyra told her, "Somewhere warm, just hold on." They reached the extraction point with 43 minutes to spare. The shuttle medics moved immediately to Venerable. They assessed the leg, started warming treatment, and focused entirely on her, which was correct. One medic eventually turned to the fire team for a status check. She got a Dane and stopped. The shoulder wound had reopened somewhere around kilometer 5. The compression seal had held the surface, but the deep tissue had torn again. His training suit on that side was dark and wet. She said, "You need to tell me these things." Dane said, "The other casualty needed to come first." She did not argue. She started working. SRYN sat on the floor of the shuttle bay and put his back against the wall. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. He was trying, again, to fit what had just happened into something he already understood. He was beginning to think that was not the right approach. The graduation ceremony at Vareth 9 was not a large event by coalition standards. No flags, no music, no long speeches from dignitaries who had not trained a day in their lives. Commander Orvith stood at a plain podium in the main assembly hall and spoke for 12 minutes. The cadets stood in formation. The hall smelled like recycled air and machine oil, the same as the day they arrived. Orvith did not mention the storm. He did not mention Ven, or the 8 kilometers, or the reopened wound. He was not that kind of officer. What he said instead was this: a soldier's value is not measured by what their species can survive. It is measured by what they choose to do inside that margin. He let that sit for a moment. Then he dismissed the formation. SRYN found Dane before the cadets dispersed. He did not apologize. Velhari did not apologize the way humans did. Not for things that had passed. Not for words already spoken. What they did instead was acknowledge, which was its own form of accounting. SRYN stood in front of Dane and said that he had been wrong about what he... Dane looked at him for a moment. Then he said he appreciated that, and that SRYN was one of the better tactical minds in the cohort, and that whatever unit he ended up in would be lucky to have him, if he stayed the kind of person who updated his thinking when the evidence told him to. SRYN did not have a response ready for that. He nodded once, precisely, and walked toward the door. Lyra came next. She had a data chip in her hand, small, blue, the kind used for archive transfers. She held it out and said she had compiled the Outer Rim conflict records she had been reading, along with the observer notes and the casualty assessments. She said she wanted to keep them. She thought every cadet at the academy should probably read them, but she would start with herself. Dane took the chip. He looked at it. He said she had probably understood more from one read than most people did. She said she doubted that, but she said it the way someone says something they half believe and are working toward the rest of the way. She also said, before she left, that she still did not fully understand why humans kept volunteering when they knew the numbers. She said it as a genuine question, not a judgment. Dane thought about it. He said, some things are worth the cost, and that humans, maybe more than most species, were good at deciding something was worth it and then refusing to let go of that decision no matter what came after. Lyra nodded slowly. She said she would think about that. She walked away still thinking about it. Doss came last. He did not come to talk. He walked up to Dane, stood close, and pressed his closed fist against Dane's shoulder, the undamaged one. A slow, firm press. He held it for 2 seconds. Then he stepped back and walked away without a word. Dane stood there for a moment. He knew enough about Orican tradition to know what the gesture meant. It was not given lightly. The assignment postings went up that afternoon. Dane read his, a mid-rim patrol unit, border zone, the kind of assignment that sounded routine and was not. He filed his acceptance and began checking his kit. Later, when the new assignment rosters were circulated, he saw something he had not expected. SRYN had requested the same posting. Lyra had requested the same posting. Doss had requested it without mentioning it to anyone. None of them had told the others. None of them had told Dane. The ceremony had given them certificates and rank pins and a meal better than the usual food by about 30%. None of that was what they were taking with them. What they were taking was harder to name. Some of it was tactical. They had learned things about how to move and think and decide under pressure. But the part that stayed, the part that would still be there 10 years later when they were older and had their own records written across their bodies, was something they had learned by watching a human stand in an evaluation room and take off his jacket without flinching. The scars were visible above Dane's collar as he left the hall. They always had been. The difference was that now, not one person in that building looked at them and saw failure. They looked at them and saw the record. And they understood, finally, what it meant to have won.